Today, we're going to talk about research design and decision making. Yes, that's popcorn. What I'd like you to do and what I want you to do is go get something to drink or something to eat, because there are a couple videos in this presentation I want to play for you. I figure if somebody else has already done the work and can get the message across, go for it. We're going to start with Dr. Jonathan Jarry's How the Media Misrepresent Risk. Jonathan works at McGill Office of Science for Society. He and Dr. Christopher Labos, a cardiologist, have a podcast called The Body of Evidence. This is in your list of resources for reputable information. As you become healthcare consumers, you're going to need to have the best information in order to make decisions. Part of what we're starting to do in this class is develop critical thinking skills to teach you how to make decisions based on fact, not fear. To be able to look at a headline that says this magic bullet is going to cure cancer and has been shown to do so in 75% of the people that took it. Or, more realistically, this weight loss medication has been shown to have a 50% increase in loss of body fat than the placebo. Well, what do those numbers mean? Let's get started.
It's trending on Facebook. A lab at your favorite university developed a new drug that will reduce your risk of developing a disease by 50%. Everyone's talking about it. But is 50% the risk you should really care about? The thing about the media is, they desperately want to survive, and they want to catch your attention. The risks they report on are often technically true, but they are not really the numbers you need to make an informed decision about your life. Let's take a disease. Canadian liver disease. It's not a real thing, just run with it. A pharmaceutical company is releasing a new daily pill to help prevent Canadian liver disease in patients who are at risk, including you. So you take this pill every day and your odds of developing the disease go down. How much down? This is your normal risk of developing this disease if your doctor says that you are at risk. With the pill, your risk decreases like so. As you can see, this is a 50% reduction in risk. Journalists, news anchors, people on Twitter, everyone is spreading the word. This drug reduces your risk of developing Canadian liver disease by 50%. This is huge. And they're not lying to you, technically. But here's what's happening. This 50% is a relative risk. It's a comparison between two risks, one in which you take the pill and one in which you don't. The question you need to ask yourself is, what is my absolute risk of developing Canadian liver disease? Here's what they're not showing you. The yellow bricks are a scale from 1 to 100. Your absolute risk of developing Canadian liver disease without the drug is 2%. Your absolute risk of developing the disease with the drug is 1%. The difference between the two is indeed 50%. 1% is 1/2 of 2%, so the difference is 50%. But when you know that you're actually going from a 2% risk, which is not very high, to a 1% risk, you're in a much better position to make an informed decision about whether or not to take this pill. Once again, this is the relative risk the media are always quoting. These are the absolute risks the media rarely show you because they're not sexy. And this 50% relative risk that is so quotable is true for many different scenarios. If your absolute risk goes from 10% to 5%, but also if it goes from 0.1% to 0.05%. The absolute risk informs you on how likely something is to occur, whereas the relative risk on its own does not. By quoting relative risk and keeping mum on absolute risk, the media, the scientists, and pharmaceutical companies dramatize the situation to catch your eye. Don't be deceived. Always look for absolute risk. Meanwhile, your absolute risk of regretting liking this video is close to 0%. So why don't you give us a like?
Go ahead, give it a like. But I don't think we need to listen to him ask us for it. Why the numbers matter. Here's another example of relative risk versus absolute risk. Let's have a look. Take a second and look at the different wordings for absolute versus relative risk. Which one do you think is going to make the headlines? Relative risk will make the headlines. It's much more exciting, or as Jonathan would say, it's much sexier. But it's the absolute risk that is more important at giving you the information you need to make a decision. Yet it is often, as it says here, underreported in both the research and the news. Another example, here's a drug called Plenity that's supposed to be for weight loss. If you go to the website, you'll see all this exciting information, all this wonderful information on how much weight loss, 50% more weight loss actually, in the group that takes the Plenity. Well, first of all, let's look at this. FDA cleared doesn't mean anything. And when you go to the website, you'll see that they did a study on 436 adults who were overweight or obese, with or without type 2 diabetes, over a 6-month period, in addition to diet and exercise. Half the folks took the experimental treatment, or the drug Plenity. Half of them took placebo. These folks in the placebo group are considered the control group, and we'll talk more about that. The results showed that individuals on Plenity lost an average of 6% of their body weight versus the individuals on the placebo, who lost an average of 4%. That's not what the headlines are going to read, though. This is what you're going to see. 50% greater weight loss on the medication, because the experimental group lost 6%, the control group lost 4%. If you do the math, 6% is 50% more than 4%. But if you look at the absolute numbers, if you dig into the data, you'll see that the group taking the medication lost an average of 14 pounds over a 6-month period, while the placebo group lost an average of 10 pounds over a 6-month period. So really, we're only talking about 4 extra pounds over a 6-month period. This is the information that you need before you decide whether or not it's worth taking a medication for 6 months for weight loss. Absolute versus relative risk. This is information that you might report depending on the type of current events that you present. The research process looks to answer questions, and it can be done carefully and systematically or haphazardly by trial and error. You need to know the questions to ask to determine which method it was used and how the research was conducted. Different types of research studies include epidemiologic studies. These look at large groups of people, and they can give us clues or insights into what's happening in a group of people that may lead to animal studies or human studies. Animal studies provide preliminary data that may also lead to human studies. But please remember, animal studies don't translate directly into humans. We are not mice. When you are looking at your news feeds, when you are reading about something magical happening, if it says mice, that's very exciting, but you need to wait for for the same thing to happen in people. If mice studies show positive results, they may be followed by what are called cell culture studies, or they may have been preceded by cell culture studies. The experimental treatment is looked at in a petri dish or a test tube, and it may be very exciting. You may find that a drug or a supplement cures cancer in a test tube. But I ask you to keep in mind, when you see this claim that says a common drug or vitamin kills cancer cells in a petri dish, so does a handgun. If it sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true. If the animal studies and the cell culture studies have good results, then hopefully the studies will progress to human subjects, We have what are called case-controlled studies. These are small-scale epidemiologic studies in which folks who have a certain condition, say prostate cancer, are compared to similar folks who do not have this condition. The researchers can then identify facts other than the disease that differ between the two groups that may give clues about progression, about prevention, and maybe even treatment of a disease. The gold standard are human clinical trials. The other video that I ask you to watch will show you an example of a double-blind placebo-controlled study on potato chips because, of course, we study potato chips. So clinical trials are also known as intervention trials or intervention studies where an intervention is used to determine the effect. In this case, these types of studies will have an experimental group and a control group in which we're looking at groups of people who are given the treatment versus a group of people that are given a placebo. And the absolute gold standard are the double-blind placebo-controlled studies.